This is the second in a series of roundtable conversations focused on Indigenous sovereignty in the United States and is produced in collaboration with Emory University's Masters in Development Practice instructor, Lori King. Lori teaches MDP 511, a core MDP course rooted in applied development practice. Today's conversation will explore why hashtag land back and hashtag decolonizing are more than just hashtags. They're a way of life. In 1492, life was much different in what we call the Americas. Millions of indigenous people and communities thrived during this time. They had their own art, cultures, customs, and languages. Life for these communities drastically changed on October 11th, 1942, when Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. Mark Charles, a Navajo indigenous activist and author, said during his TED Talk, "We the People," when you think about it, you can't discover lands where people are already living. Here we are now, on October 18th, 2022, 530 years after Christopher Columbus started the genocide of indigenous people, communities, art, culture, customs, languages, and so much more, living in what we now call the United States of America. In preparation for this conversation, I've been asking myself, what does it mean to read a land acknowledgement? Who's benefiting from such an acknowledgement? Can reading a land acknowledgement lead to indigenous communities obtaining their stolen land? I don't have the answers to these questions, but hopefully today's conversation can assist you in determining your answer. Joining me today and unpacking these questions is my friend and colleague, Sean Littlehorn of Red Road Institute. Sean, thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Can you just, introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, Madakiapi. Wasitu Sean Littlehorn Amachiapi. My name is Sean Littlehorn. That is my colonized name. My Lakota name is Nape Suto, which means strong hand. I come to you from the Great Oglala Lakota Nation, also known by the U.S. government as Prisoner of War Camp 334, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And Josh is always just excited and appreciative of you, of Emory, of Lori, everybody helping get these messages out, and appreciate so much having this time to fellowship with you.
As always. And so we're going to go ahead and get started and listen to a land acknowledgement. While you listen, if you feel any discomfort at any point in time, I ask you to lean into that. Don't cover your ears or look away. Lean into that and ask yourself, why do I feel this way? So here we go and listening to this video.
Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Hello, my name is Karina Emmerich. I am an artist and fashion designer originally from the Coast Salish Territory Puyallup tribe. I have been working and residing on Lenapehoking for 12 years now. I would like to acknowledge that the city of New York is located on Lenapehoking, the unceded traditional territory of the Lenape people, who are also known by the colonial government as the Delaware Nation. The majority of Lenape peoples and the main political and cultural body of the tribe ended up in Oklahoma after repeated removals and relocations spanning over 50 years of exodus, leading halfway across Turtle Island in what is now known as North America. After forced removals of Lenape people from their homeland, many reside in the 3 federally recognized bands in the U.S., in what is now known as Oklahoma and Wisconsin, and 3 federally recognized bands in Canada. However, I would like to acknowledge that I do not see colonial borders, so let's just call it 6. I am here to pay respect to the Lenape peoples past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. I would also like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples who have and who presently live, work, create, and contribute to communities here in Lenapehoking, as Manhattan is home to the largest urban Indian population. I recognize the continual displacement and violence perpetuated against indigenous people by the United States, including and most notably when the Lenape returned to the island of Manhattan after seasonal migrations, only to find a wall decorated in heads of Lenape people. As a warning, bounties were then placed on all the heads of Lenape men, women, and children. That wall is currently now Wall Street, which is fitting because of the treachery that continues to go on there today. I would like to wholeheartedly thank and honor my friend Joe Whittle of the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma and the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma, who is a direct descendant of Lenape matriarchs and chiefs. I want to thank him for sharing knowledge and trust in a random Coast Salish woman who is living on his territory to share this knowledge with you today. And I'm humbled to be given the opportunity to present a land acknowledgement in his honor. In his words, Joe would like to say, Waneshi, thank you for listening and holding space for the Lenape voice and perspective. I would also like to express that I am aware that these kinds of acknowledgements can be misused for stand-ins for actional decolonization work, which is something to bear in mind while continuing to work to dismantle the ongoing effects of the colonial legacy here and elsewhere. I am here today to incite a revolution and create allyship between climate justice defenders and Indigenous people. I am here today to ask you for your help to dismantle systems of oppression throughout the world built by colonial institutions. I am not here as performance or as tokenism or fetishism. Indigenous people have been fighting this fight and refusing to submit to colonial oppression and violence in order to protect this land for over 500 years. I am here to ask you to stand alongside and in solidarity with Indigenous people. Indigenous people make up about 4% of the population of the world after repeated attempts at genocide, and we are still protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity. In the face of corporate-started fires to promote deforestation on our homelands, to the repeated atrocities and murder and violence from the colonial settlers, the RCMP, the United States Police Force, pipeline workers, and man camps, which is leading to the continued extinction of our animal relatives, our clean water, and soon ourselves. I am asking you to show up on the front lines, connect with Indigenous people whose land you're living on. I ask you to recognize and listen to Indigenous voices, and especially our elders' voices. Because even our fight now is being whitewashed. I do not fault any individual for fighting for climate justice, but I have to say the imagery of a young white woman sailing to our lands to enlighten our people of something that we have been screaming at the top of our lungs for 500 years needs to be recognized. Align yourselves with Indigenous communities. Thank you. We are the original stewards of this land. Discredit institutions that continue to silence our voices, and above all, please listen. We like to talk about decolonization. Now I'm asking you to show me your work, because this room is very fancy, but it's time for all of us to get our hands dirty. My name's Karina Emmerich again.
So I also work at a university, and a lot of the times before our conferences, we'll read land acknowledgements that are very different and talk about honoring the indigenous tribes in which you live on, which we exist on. I've personally have never heard a land acknowledgement written in such a beautiful, honest, historically accurate way. Sean, what are your impressions as you sat there and listened to her read her truth?
Yeah, I think that that's land acknowledgement done right for so many reasons I'm sure we'll talk about throughout this. But I think that, first and foremost, making a real spot for it, right? Like not just, I understand, if you're on a quick 5-minute radio interview, right? For instance, you can't do a long introduction like that. But in a moment where you have that many people gathered and you're going to take the time to do a land acknowledgement, do it right. Do it the way that she did it. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those ways coming up, but I just love the authenticity of it. I love the structure of not just this is where we were, but this is who we are today. And this is what's going on today. A very, very powerful land acknowledgement. Hopefully really a blueprint for the way it should be done.
What do you think, the ways should be done, should be done? How should it be done? Similar to this, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, for me, first of all, understand that I think whenever possible, whenever it can be done, that if you're going to have a land acknowledgement at an event or you're going to have a land acknowledgement in a setting like this, we should always, if possible, have an indigenous person that leads that statement. Now,
Why do you say that?
because there is an understanding and a passion that comes from, first of all, a person that deals with the results of this system every day. But to me, even more importantly, Josh, is something that we've talked about many times. It's bringing indigenous faces to the front, that people realize that we are still here. There was a survey that came out, a very in-depth survey not that long ago, that said that 40% of people in the United States of America didn't even think that natives were still around. They thought that we were extinct. Now, there have been others with less, but there's still a huge level of the population that thinks we're gone. And for those that are here, many of them, and especially the system, still sees us through the eyes of the doctrine of discovery. They still see us as subpar. They still see us as less than human. That's why, and I know this is always a tough conversation, but that's why it's so easy for people to wear natives as mascots, but no other race, right? Because we're seen as less than human.
Absolutely.
And it's important to put us out on the front. Let us tell our stories. I think we're in a moment in time. This is something I appreciate so much about our friend Lori. Dealing with Lori, she never tries to tell my story. What she does is she opens the door for me to tell my story.
She passes the mic in a sense to be able to.
Right. She has the mic and she could speak and she could get the attention, but she passes it on to indigenous folks to tell their story. And I think it's important because, as we talked about before, and I think it's worth mentioning again for maybe those who weren't there, but Josh, as indigenous people, our faces are the reminder of this nation's sins. And if
what are those? Can we address those sins? Can we name those sins?
Say again. I'm sorry.
Can you name those sins for people that might not know what those sins are? Can you name them so that people are aware of or what's happened?
Right. Absolutely. So much of us as indigenous people gets caught into history, and we know at some level the history. Most people don't know the true history. Most people don't know about Kill the Indian, Save the Man boarding schools. They don't know that, almost all of our population was taken away from their parents and put into schools where they were abused and beaten if they spoke their language. They were beaten if they practiced their culture, their spirituality. Most people don't realize until 1978. I don't want to date myself, but I was born in 79. 1978, we could be arrested for simply practicing our spirituality. 1978, they could come and take our children without any paperwork or any of the things. Two big legislations passed during that time. And we're seeing still today, and I don't want to go too far off, but still today, we're dealing with a system that treats us subhuman. That is why our women and our children are missing. Over, the last year they kept record of it. Almost 6,000 indigenous women came up missing. And because of the law that does not allow us to prosecute the people that commit these crimes, only the FBI can really get involved. Only about 150 of those, less than 150 of those, were actually logged into the database. Because of that system that tells us we're sovereign nations. They tell us that we are nations within a nation, not just the government today, but their own U.S. Constitution tells us we are sovereign nations. And yet they do not give us the rights of a sovereign nation. They do not. They regulate us. They keep us in these what are, like I said, if you check many documents, even today, you'll see Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, where I live, is Prisoner of War Camp 334. We were sent here to die. We were sent here to perish. We survived, but it's time for us to begin to strive, and that's by addressing the system that continues to hold us back in so many ways. And Josh, we've covered those subjects, but man, they're crucial to today.
I mean, I think the systems of oppression oppress all minoritized people in this country in an intentional way. And I want to get back to the doctrine of discovery. I was really tapping into that yesterday and looking into it. Can you tell our audience about that and how that doctrine impacts, indigenous communities and just minoritized people in the present day?
Absolutely. First of all, I would like to say, as you mentioned, Mark Charles, I would encourage everybody to go to his TED Talk, We the People. And he does a great job. I think it's about 15, 16, 17 minutes. It does a fantastic job of breaking it down more thorough than I can in this time frame. But in essence, the Pope at that time, the church ran England in essence, and the Pope created a document, and he created a document called the Doctrine of Discovery. And in essence, it said that anywhere that you go, any land that you come across, if that land is inhabited by non-church members, so if you are not a member of the Catholic Church, if you are not a member of the Church of England, if you will, that those people were subhuman, they were less than human. And because of that, that you were allowed to discover a land that was already occupied. And not only that, but he encouraged them to enslave the people that were there and use them as workers. And so the Catholic Church, through the Doctrine of Discovery and the Pope's office, made law that said that if land is occupied by non-church members, it is not discovered. And you mentioned one of the Mark Charles quotes in that I love so much. He says, "How can you discover something that's already occupied?" Right? Like if you don't believe me, put your wallets and your cell phones on the table, and I'll come by and discover them. Right? It's like the first person to walk on the moon. Did they discover the moon? No, the moon was already there. They just came to it for the first time. But that's not the way that we teach history, and that's because of, again, the Doctrine of Discovery that unfortunately has also been held up as law by the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. And I want to add too that the Doctrine of Discovery was used within the founding documents of this country. The Declaration of Independence has aspects, methodologies, terminology of the Doctrine of Discovery written into it. If you don't believe me, you can go and read the Declaration of Independence. African Americans weren't even viewed as fully human at that time. This precedent still shows up, as Sean is alluding to, in the current context, right? The Marshall Court used the Doctrine of Discovery in precedent that was then reinforced by RBG when it was indigenous communities trying to get land and the occupation of land. So I think we really need, when you think of land acknowledgements, you need to think of the whole story. Gary, our director, has some images of Turtle Island, and just to bring in context of where we currently are. So this is Turtle Island, present day North America, the Americas, whichever you want to call it. We have another slide of the over 500 indigenous nations that exist. Think about that, over 500 indigenous nations that exist, were thriving 530 years ago. And the Doctrine of Discovery allowed a man named Christopher Columbus come and commit one of the greatest genocides that people celebrate in certain places around the world. And here we are now. Sean, do you think organizations should use land acknowledgements? Like, what is the value of that? If it sounds like you're a proponent of indigenous individuals reading such an acknowledgement. If an organization, doesn't have indigenous individuals who are able to read this, should it be read? How can a land acknowledgement not be viewed as performative?
Right. Well, I think first of all, there is value in it. I think that's something that we should, especially when done right, there's a great amount of value that is in it. And here's why I believe that. George Emory, an Aboriginal, I may have shared this with you before, I'm not sure, Josh, but he's an Aboriginal leader from Canada. And he said one of my favorite quotes in the whole world. He said, "Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is formed, common memory must be created." So in my opinion, land acknowledgements are the beginning of shared common memory. It's beginning that conversation that we begin to share the reality that many of us were not able to learn in school, that we were not able to learn from our parents. It is the beginning of a shared common memory. However, left at just a land acknowledgement, they stop far short of building real community. So they are a starting point. They are a good thing to acknowledge the people that are there. But like I said, I think it's crucial for indigenous people, whenever possible, to lead that conversation, or in these longer platforms, maybe even bringing it down to that particular tribe. What I loved in that initial land acknowledgement that you showed, She was indigenous, but she was not indigenous of that particular tribe. And so she read a quote. She allowed that a person from that tribe and that nation to have a voice in that meeting, even though they couldn't be there. And that is the beginning of real community. When we allow not history books to tell our stories, not documentaries to tell our stories, not that there's not value in those, but it's time for us as indigenous people to take back our voices. We don't need anybody else to tell our story. We can tell our story. Now, in a shorter aspect, we have less time. Yes, get in what you can get in. But obviously, like I said, it's most important that it's the starting block, not the finish block. And that's what happens. That's what frustrates so many people within the indigenous community.
No, absolutely. I want to bring up a question that our friend Lori sent me. So like land acknowledgement's all the rage, and I think you spoke to it. I think you answered it, but I want to ask, how do people live into that discord? How do people move beyond reading a land acknowledgement and living a life that acknowledges the land?
Absolutely. I think that it starts with where you're at, right? Like you're not going to, none of us, how do you eat a big old elephant, right? One bite at a time. So instead of trying to focus on changing the world through, one deep study, just learn the land that you live in, the land that you're in. Learn about and I believe you have some resources you'll share with them later on, but learn about the people that live there, learn about the people that still live there in many cases. And if that tribe has been moved, learn about that tribe where they are today. They may have been removed through Trail of Tears or the Long Walk or whatever different thing affected their tribe. Learn about them and then reach out to them. Let me tell you something about our communities. Our communities, when people reach out to us, for the most part, we're like every other race. We have our people that are not as good about this, but for the most part, we embrace, we love. Again, I go back to Lori. She comes on our indigenous land. Yeah, she's like a sister to us. She's as much indigenous to us as anybody is. She's part of our family. And so we as Lakota people, and let me speak for Lakota people, not all Lakota people, but our beliefs. We believe not in separation, but we believe in coming together as a people. In fact, the 7th generation prophecy by Crazy Horse that says the Red Nation will rise again talks about a time that the world is going to be in chaos and people are going to come to us for wisdom. I love reading these things about scientists now saying, you know what, indigenous people had it right the whole time, about the environment and things of that nature. But we're not looking to separate. When we talk about land back, we're not talking about removing white people or anybody else from our land. That's what happened to us. We don't want to do that to you. What we're talking about is coming together as a circle, but allowing us to use, as the indigenous people of this land, letting us use the knowledge that we have that has been passed down to us from our elders, that has been confirmed now again by science. Allow us to lead the conversations. And that's what truly happens when we come into that circle. But we're not looking to exclude. We want to include you. We want you as part of our circle. And that was part of our problem, maybe. If you read Christopher Columbus's diaries, what did he say about the first indigenous people he came across? He said their kindness was so great, you would have to see it to believe it. And then the next lines were like, but we can entrap 50 of them and run the whole place.
And then I think he finished up that first entry too with, I'm going to take 6 back to Spain to gift to the king and queen. We see, honestly, maybe the dichotomy of collectivist society versus individualistic society, right? Like Columbus was deeply individualistic, wanted his own ego to be struck, wanted to be able to say, I was the first person to discover the Americas, yet here are indigenous communities thriving with open arms, welcoming these foreign individuals onto their lands. And look what we have now. Gary, can you show the image of the treaties? I wanted people to really be able to see the various treaties that were struck that has led to the Trail of Tears, to these prison war camps. This is an image of the various treaties in the Americas, in Canada, and in the United States. that led to what I would say the stolen lands. You know, let that sink in. First image was in Turtle Island, and now here we are. Then additionally, we have another image of various languages that are spoken throughout these lands. And one thing that Sean and I talk about often, and Sean put me onto this, is currently throughout this whole conversation, and at one point there wasn't, but we were speaking in English.
Right.
English isn't indigenous to this land. Let that sink in. The English language is not indigenous to this land.
That's right.
Do you know the language in which you should be speaking? I don't. I'm biracial. My dad's black. My mom's white. I would have no idea on my black side the language in which I should be speaking that was stolen from me when my people survived the Middle Passage. But I think that's deeply important to think about the language and how
every way I speak in English is the result of trauma.
Yeah.
It's the result of trauma that 6 of my 8 great grandparents were all boarding school victims, and they were all, and 2 of my grandparents were also extended down, but they were beaten. My auntie tells the story. My grandmother tells the story of being taken at 4 years old. She was stolen from her family, put into these boarding schools, right? And all she could speak was Lakota. That was it. That's the only thing she knew. She didn't know English, so she spoke Lakota. And every time she spoke it, they would spank her and throw her into this cellar, this dark cellar with no windows. And she said that, look, I didn't know what I was getting in trouble for. I didn't know what they were saying to me in English. And so what they did is they broke down our people and beat them to the point where they had to speak this language. The same is true of people that were brought over here through slavery. It was done in a different, it wasn't a boarding school that did it, but it was the same thing. You speak our language or we beat you, we persecute you, we put you down. So every word that I speak now is the result of trauma. It's like a scar upon the back of my ancestors. And that's hard. That's why it's so wonderful when we see people returning back to their language. Josh, me and you're going to get together. I'm a family tree expert. We're going to get together and find out what language that is.
I would love to. I would love to be able to step into that and continue with my liberation journey and my decolonization.
I love bragging on my children.
Please.
I've got an 18-year-old. He didn't start learning the language until 2.5 years ago, but it is a sacred spiritual language, and it has taken off in ways that blows even people's mind around here. He started his own nonprofit, and he's teaching the language now through Mario games. He'll take clips of Mario. He's teaching the language because he says, for instance, in the Hispanic population, they have shows where they're, that connects to their children. They're able to learn the language. So he's creating these videos. But I'm going to tell you, every time my son walks through this house, every time my daughter walks through the house, either of my sons, and they're speaking our language, I feel chills. Like I can just feel, if y'all watch the Reservation Dogs, they have a scene that shows the young girl praying and all of the ancestors' hands on her back. That's what I feel every time my kids speak that language. We can overcome this trauma, but it's trauma when we speak it.
No, that's beautiful. This is so beautiful that you have that. I want to switch things up and ask about grassroots activism.
Yeah.
So when you hear the phrase community outrage to grassroots activism, what comes to mind? Was the American Indian movement born out of community outrage?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So 20-second background to those who aren't familiar. The American Indian movement came up in the late 60s. And then in the early 70s really began to have an impact. They overtook and occupied Alcatraz prison. They took over Mount Rushmore. One of my heroes that Lori and I got to meet again just the other day, Madonna Thunderhawk, was a part of that. They overtook 5 miles from where I live. They occupied Wounded Knee area. You've probably heard of Wounded Knee, from where the United States government came in and shot down hundreds of mostly women and children. All they were doing was practicing their spirituality and praying, and they were shot down and thrown into a mass grave in a ditch. And so they chose that location for a reason. But all of those actions were based out of community outrage, that communities would call the American Indian movement and they would say, look, this is happening to our people. They're doing this to our people. Up in Custer, they were covering up crimes. From there, down below us in Nebraska, they were covering up crimes. The American Indian movement came down and they stood up. And for the first time, I mean, the pride, I can't tell you what it feels like when I meet a Madonna Thunderhawk and talk with her, but the pride that they brought back to our people that says we are Lakotas, we are whatever tribe they were at this time. We're going to practice our spirituality. We're going to be who we were created to be. We're going to speak our language. It was dead here. On Pine Ridge Reservation, nobody was sweating. Nobody was sun dancing. Nobody was practicing or praying in their spiritual ways. Nobody was doing it. And the American Indian movement caught the outrage of the community, and they came in and said, hey, as we say in the indigenous community, said, students, in other words, to say, let's do this. And they went at them. And because of them, that is why we have the American, like I said, in 1978, they passed the right that we could no longer be arrested for praying. For praying, not even to some, people have this, we were praying to the Creator. We were praying to God, and we would get into sweats and we would just pray and sing songs, and they'd be thrown in jail. They would be beaten. They were tired of it. But the American Indian movement, out of outrage from the people, Madonna Thunderhawk, again, my hero, Madonna Thunderhawk, look her up.
Why is she your hero? Why is she your hero?
Because she has done more for our people than anybody else, I believe, that's ever walked the face of this earth for the Lakota people. And what I mean by that is, like, we celebrate and we love Crazy Horse, the greatest warrior that ever lived. He was magnificent for our people. We celebrate Russell Means, who was our Martin Luther King. He was our Malcolm X. He was the guy that stood up and said, I don't care if you like it. We're in your face. We're Indian. Deal with it. We love those people. But they had shorter time periods. Madonna Thunderhawk has been doing this as a Native woman. Yeah. As a Native woman who was, valued as less and less and less. It was bad enough that she was indigenous. She was a woman too. She was the first one. They were having to hold her back sometimes, right? When she would go at the people. But now here she is in her 80s. You know what she's doing? She's not sitting back in a recliner telling old stories. She's helping bring a tribally controlled child protective services to her reservation, getting the word out, leading a grandmother's group in her 80s that's bringing this amazing change. For those who are not aware, in the South Dakota, you're not supposed to be able to take indigenous children from indigenous homes without the tribe signing off on it. But we are 12% of the population in South Dakota. We are almost 60% of the children that are in child protective services, because they are the number one moneymaker for them. Our children are labeled as high needs, and so they get extra federal money. It's the number one moneymaker.
When you say they, can you name they for our audience?
The state government. They're major. So tourism is their third biggest moneymaker. Cattle is there's 2.5, 3 cattle to every person in the state. And then Indian kids are the number one moneymaker. They get not only state funding, but they get federal money for every year that they're in the system. They get this huge amount of money for each kid. And so it's financially good for them. So they're stealing our children. They're taking them taking them where we can't find them. We can't locate them. Madonna Thunderhawk says, nope. I'm going to set up right here in this place in my 80s. She just got there. She is. Oh my gosh. There is my hero right there. That woman. Let me say there's a 1 hour documentary out there. Called I believe it's called Warrior Women. That's about her life. Look it up. She is the gold standard.
It sounds like, as you talk, Sean, I hear this grassroots activism, indigenous activism, is a form of resistance and resilience, having to exist on land that is stolen and be oppressed. Like, would you say that? Like,
Absolutely.
No,
absolutely. But because this grassroots level is where it's at, and that's where real change happens. Madonna will tell you. She always says you can, or I've heard many people. My grandmother told me. She said when I was reading a book about the American Indian movement, she said you're going to hear about the guys. She said you're going to hear about Russell. You're going to hear about Dennis Banks. You're going to hear about the guy. But it wasn't the guys. It was the women that were holding everything together. It was the women that were leading the way. The men would be in front of the cameras, but the women were making the change. And I don't know if I shared with them, but in this, for 72 days, we had a shootout with a shootout. They had the federal government, they had the National Guards, all trying to remove us, and our people just stood up to them until we came to an agreement. But the point is this: you're 100% right. As Madan always says, the grassroots is where change happens.
Absolutely.
Grassroots is where differences are made, and we can. People that that want all the celebrity, they want all the TVs, they can have it. But the people who are doing it in the grassroots, those are the people that are making change. That's why many people never know Madonna Thunderhawk's name. They'll know Sitting Bull, they'll know Crazy Horse, they'll know these people. But that woman right there has done as much or more for our people than anybody else that's ever a Lakota that's ever lived.
Well, I don't know about our audience, but I'm definitely going to look more into Madonna. I know both you and Lori have told me so much about her, and I'm going to do my homework and continue to educate myself on this agent of change that's done so much for your people. And speaking of grassroots activism, I want to show a clip from June of 2017. In this clip, you're going to hear, Indigenous peoples from Canada talking about why they erected a teepee on Parliament Hill to protest Canada Day. It's a very honest and real conversation. And once again, if you feel uncomfortable, I implore you to lean into that discomfort and ask yourself why.
And I can speak for myself. You know what, white people, you've had your voice here for 524 years. 524 years you've been visible, white lady. You've been visible for 524 years. Look how fast your white man comes and steps up for you. Where is everybody else to come and step up for us? I have a right to my voice. I'm still fighting for my voice and my visibility. And I'm telling you right now, there has been 524 years of holistic genocide on Turtle Island. We're the ones that are dying. It's not you that is dying. And as far as how Justin Trudeau is doing, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we're asking the United Nations to help us that charges of genocide, a war against humanity, war crimes, and a crime of aggression be laid, because your Liberal Party was also responsible. Every party, every governance that has been in power, there's been a war conflict of Indian Residential School, 60 Scoop, Indian Day School, and Millennium Scoop. None of your governments have clean hands. All of your governments have blood on their hands. None of you are different. You haven't changed because you haven't started your healing journeys. The moment that we have our voice in our backbone, you want to shut us down. And you think you're privileged to disrespect us. The moment we tell you, because of your colonial mindset and your colonial way of being, your white privilege, your white fragility, you can't take our truth. Look how many people came to bat for you, white lady, and you're a guest here. Without us, you'd be homeless.
Without us, you'd be homeless. What's real interesting about this clip, as I did my research into it, the Canadian press labeled these demonstrators as violent towards the press, or disrespectful in their response. But I think she got to a really good point. I think that maybe she's cut from the same cloth as Madonna Thunderhorn. What's your last name?
Thunderhawk.
Thunderhawk, thank you.
Yes.
Right, standing up in front of the camera, speaking her truth, telling the audience, you can't take our truth. Where is everybody going to come and stand up for us?
Right.
I have a right to my voice. I'm still fighting for my voice and my visibility. I think sometimes you have to be direct, you have to be honest, and you have to make people uncomfortable at times so that they can lean into their discomfort. Sharon, when you listen to that video, what came to mind? What'd you think of? How did it resonate with you?
Well, first of all, I'll say that that's why you never mess with a unchi, one of our grandmothers, because they're the toughest ones. They're made of the strongest cloth, man, and that's why women lead. Women lead our society when we're at our best, and that's the way it's always been. They're so strong. But what she feels, and for people that just come in and they see that clip, a lot of people are going to look and see an angry woman. They're going to see an angry indigenous person, and they're not going to understand why that she's angry, because they don't understand what it's like to over and over again to speak your voice and speak your truth and nobody listened. You know, I thought about when that was playing, I thought about here in Rapid City. It's the closest city to us. It's where we go to Walmart or wherever. It's about an hour and a half away. There was a lady that owned several businesses there. One of them was a real big hotel that's there with the indoor parks and all that stuff. And she made a Facebook post talking about, this was just this past year, talking about that she was no longer allowing Indians on her property. And she said, because she can't tell the good ones from the bad ones, Indians were no longer allowed in her business, her establishment, or a restaurant. And we as indigenous people, we stood up and we began to protest. And you would go by her place and you would see, but the problem was it was like 99.9% indigenous people that are protesting. We had nobody standing with us when we were protesting this. We have petitioned the Department of Justice with tens of thousands of emails asking them again to live up to their own laws. It is against the Civil Rights Act to deny anybody lodging because of their race. It's illegal. We've asked them come down, investigate, and to punish and to show us that we matter. They never came. We have this situation. This is one situation out of many where we're saying if you are forcing dual citizenship upon us, if you are saying that we have the right to be a citizen of our nation, but we have to also by default be a citizen of your nation, then give us the same and able rights that you give other people. And it's not just us as indigenous people. We know that other minorities struggle with this visibility as well. But we're standing here and we want to be heard. We're saying our women and our children are being stolen, and you're doing zero about it. And it gets to the point that we come in peace, but there comes a time that the frustration is just too much. Because how long can you reach out your hand of equality and friendship and it being slapped away and you just keep coming back for more?
Sure. I mean, that leads me into a really good question that Lori sent over is, how should we respond in a world where the violence of the system is not considered violent, but the resistance to that violence is always considered and punished as violence?
Right. Man, you are speaking our everyday language. Perfect example is Standing Rock. And when we went down for the protest and indigenous people showed up in waves and thousands of people in the freezing cold, in the snow everywhere. Right. And I would like to also say that in that case, we had a lot of allies that showed up as well, which was great. But our people were arrested as terrorists for protesting on a land that belongs to us, not just by history, but by the United States Constitution that says in Article 6, Section 2, all treaties. We talk about this, Josh, not some of them, not a few of them, not occasionally. All treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. And so we have treaty rights to this land that we're protesting. You are poisoning our people. You are destroying our waters. We are standing up in peace. Not one weapon, not one gun. And look up the videos. It looks like a war zone. They're releasing dogs on us. They're hitting us with rubber bullets, shooting kids off of horses with rubber bullets. They're dropping tear gas from the sky. I mean, it was the prime example of how the United States of America, number one, doesn't live up to their own laws, and number two, too often judges other countries who are doing the same thing that they're doing to our people behind closed doors because we don't have the cameras on it to bring attention to it. So where does that go? You come in peace, but how long does peace last, right? Like, how long can you take it? I can just speak for me. We always go to places and protest with a peaceful heart, trying to bring it. but we also, there's a level on our land that we know that you can't cross this land or we have to protect it. We have to protect our women. We have to protect our children. Kristi Noem, the governor, and this is not a political statement, just a statement of what happened. But
Yeah.
Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, when COVID-19 hit, we put up checkpoints all across to protect our people, because the average household income here is less than $10,000. A lot of people, you know, you might have 10, 11 people who live in one single wide trailer, because we as Lakota people are taught that you always take care of your elders.
Yeah.
And so we bring them into our homes to take care of them. And because of that, we are at extreme high danger of catching COVID and it wiping out generations, way more so than outside of the reservation. So we put up checkpoints. She makes the statement, we're coming, you know, you need to take these checkpoints down or else we're going to bring this and that. And so it was taken as a threat.
Yeah.
And people showed up prepared to go to war with the National Guard or whoever if they tried to invade our land. So we have to circle around that land, most certainly. But
yeah, it seems like that Columbus mindset is still ever present.
Yeah, it is.
It hasn't really changed.
And the Supreme Court's recent ruling has made it even worse. We thought we had won a victory in the original ruling that said that basically most of Oklahoma was still reservation land.
Yeah.
And then Castro Huerto case, they now said that police can come into our lands and arrest non-natives for crimes. And people say, well, isn't that good? Well, if you could trust the government to do the right thing, then maybe you could look at it as good. But if you it takes away from our sovereignty. If you recognize it's a sovereign nations, nobody's invading Russia to get Brittany Griner back, right? So how can you invade my nation to get somebody back that you want? We should be allowed to prosecute. But you're right. It comes to the point we have to, you know, people get mad. Well, they're too aggressive. They're too loud. They're too this. They're too that. If it isn't working, something's got to change.
We aren't slaves.
Right.
Right. We aren't slaves. We can't do what the massa wants us to do.
Right.
We have a voice, like the woman alluded to in this video. We're going to use it. You know, how we live our life is a form of historical resistance and resilience to the system of oppressions that have literally killed our ancestors.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the way they attack the different races, the different minorities is different. I know for us, they still treat us like commodity Indians. And when we first moved to the reservation, they said, well, if you'll move to the reservation, and for us in particular, we didn't have the same experience that like the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, even the Navajos had. For us, we had a 2-year war with the United States of America from 1866 to 1868 called the Red Clouds War. As the U.S. was expanding west, they tried to cross our land, which we'd already agreed upon they wouldn't. And so we fought and we protected, and the United States came in and said, listen, we need peace. And they said, if you'll go to these reservations, we'll make sure you have all of these things. You let our people go. You won't kill them. We'll no more war. We'll be fine. And so we go to the reservations, and then we're told you can't leave without a permit or a notice from a white person that you're a good Indian. And then we're going to give you food. But if you're not a good Indian, we're going to cut that rations back. We're going to get just a little bit till you get in line. It's the same thing they do to us today.
Yeah. I mean, I know we have people that are international development practitioners are going to be, some might say that tactic is still enlisted by various international organizations, right? Doing development work in developing countries, that if you don't do this, then you can't get that, right? If you don't say yes to this, then we're not going to help you here. And so it's an ongoing nasty systemic issue or issues or system that really hasn't worked, or it has worked to continue a certain type of living or to support a certain type of person. Right. Real quickly, I want to transition into decolonization, right? And what are steps that individuals can take in their decolonization journey. I know you and I met over the summer, and you've really put me on to my own decolonization journey. So what advice would you give to people who want to become decolonized, that want to go in deeper and to unpack these various issues?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say it's a hard process, and it's not a quick process. It's a daily process. But I will tell you this, as a person who was completely had a colonized mindset before I began to realize the fault of the ways. I'm still going through that process daily today. I'm still trying to grow in that process to be less colonized than I was. But first of all, I would say it comes to it. First thing you have to do is have a real conversation with yourself, because what you're about to find out is that almost everything that you have ever been taught is wrong. I grew up being shipped from house to house, from parent to the foster care situation. So when I became an adult, my whole mindset was I got to make money. I'm going to make sure my children never struggle like I struggle. I'm going to make sure my children know that they can they're in a safe place, and there's value in that. But that is not, that is a colonized mindset, because see, capitalism teaches us it's about how much we can store up, where our traditional values, our indigenous values teach us it's actually about how much we can give away, how much we can help others. You look at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, Prisoner of War Camp 334, Oglala Lakota Nation, where I live. It's called the poorest nation in the United States of America, or excuse me, the poorest county in the United States of America. We're the richest county in the United States of America, because we are connecting to our culture, our lifeways, our spirituality. Now, this is what I want to say, Josh. It's so important that people look and say, well, I'm not indigenous of this land, or I'm not this. You are also a victim of colonization. You are a victim of a system that took the elite, and everything is to promote the elite. We talked about the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution was built for one demographic: white, land-owning males. That was it. Not women, not indigenous people, not black people, not Hispanic people.
And not poor white males either.
Exactly. And so it was for those who were of the elite status. And today they have brainwashed us to believe that is the path that we should walk. And it's not true.
I want to add too, is some of these people that have, their capital and generational wealth came at the backs of slaves. Right? Built their financial, status on the backs of slaves, and gained generational wealth through slavery. I mean, the founding fathers were slave owners, right? Right.
And that system's still in place. It's not changed. We can't own land where I live, because even though people think it's a special land, it's actually land that's put in a trust that's owned by the United States government. And because we can't own the land, we can't pass down that wealth to our children. So that's how that poverty system and cycle continues. But the U.S. Constitution, Mark Charles does a great job, if you listen to that thing, talking about that, like slavery, for instance, was never abolished. If you look at slavery, and when they amended it, it doesn't say, it says that to do away with it, except for in the case of, and it then enlists the criminal justice system as a form of slavery. And so all it did was recodify slavery into the system. And so again, this is Mark Charles's words. I'm taking them, but I think people should hear them. Is that when you look at the United States of America and you see how many of our people are people of color that are in the prison system, you shouldn't be surprised the Constitution's working. When you see that women make less money than men by a great magnitude, you shouldn't be surprised the Constitution is working. And you go through all of these things, the Constitution is doing exactly what it was built to do. But here's the thing. You that are listening can be a part of the solution to up in this status, that you, the people, can make the change. You don't have, there is nothing that blows my mind more than poor people defending the rights of rich people to stay richer. Like, that just blows my mind.
It don't make sense.
So let's change the way we think. Let's open our mind that maybe everything we weren't taught, maybe it wasn't right. And let's begin to open our mind and our hearts to different styles of understanding the world, and the way that we should treat Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, the way that we should treat our neighbors, the way that we should treat each other. These principles that we have as indigenous people of this land, and that our Black and Hispanic brothers also understand. Listen, we can come together and we can change the system, but you have to make the decision. And so what you do is you begin to find people that have gone through the process. You begin to read. You begin to learn and listen to their things, and understand that, listen, there's a better way that's out there.
Let's go.
All you young
Yeah.
college students that are you've had years of education. Let me tell you something. Education is valuable. I have it. There's a lot of value in it. But let me say this: a lot of what you've been taught is wrong.
Mm.
A lot of what you've been shared with you is not correct information, and you are being hidden from the truth. And the truth is out there. And I'll say this: if anybody that's listening to this wants to talk and talk about personally, individually, how we can go through this process, you can contact me. If you don't mind, I'll share my email. It's
Yeah.
Shaun, SHAUN, at redroad, REDROAD, institute.org.
Yeah.
And please contact me, because each individual path will be different, but start that path, make that decision. That truth is the most important thing.
I agree. Truth is definitely the most important thing. And real quickly, before we run out of time, I want to, show a clip too, from a TED Talk of a woman talking about steps that you can take to continue this decolonization, which Shaun has also spoken to. So we're going to go ahead and show that. And then Gary, hopefully we'll be able to get a banner of Shaun's email so you all can reach out.
We need you.
Whether we like it or not, colonization is a messy and shameful history that connects us all. Here we are all in this room together. So what do we do moving forward? When people ask me, what can I do to decolonize? I give them a caveat and I tell them, well, that's not going to be a one answer. It's not going to be a one-day fix. However, I can give you a few first steps, because if you do your work, then we can come back together and collectively do the real work that needs to be done. So if you want to go home today and start to enact your journey of decolonization, you can figure out how to answer that first question I said to you. Where do your people come from? How did you get here? Learn whose land you live on and what has been done to them in order for you to occupy their lands. Address the oppressive systems and history that enable you to occupy the territory you do now. Find out how you benefit from this history and activate one strategy wherein you can use your privilege to dismantle that. And share this knowledge, share this conversation with your barista, with your babysitter, with your Tinder date. I don't care. But I want you to have these conversations. And I promise you, when you start to have these conversations of looking at a longer now, of asking the history of people, your world will suddenly become a lot more interesting. And so will your identity. Finally, what's it all for? Why should we do this? Well, because decolonization looks like living without paralyzing guilt and shame about who you are and the social identity you've inherited. Decolonization looks like giving up social and economic power and privilege that directly disempowers, appropriates, and invisibilizes others. Decolonization looks like smashing the patriarchy. Decolonization looks like doing the work to find out who you are, where you came from, and committing to build communities that work together to collectively create a more sustainable and equitable future. And finally, decolonization looks like celebrating who we are and connecting with the unique knowledge that we each bring to this time and that we need to solve the problems that are laid out in front of us. So it's really easy to think about our future ancestors because we have such beautiful little ones in the room. Good reminder. Thank you so much for opening this space today. But I really invite you to look back and think about your grandmothers that I asked you about, and take a moment to look forward and ask yourself what you can do in your lifetime, what you can do today and in your work and with your passions and with your gifts to start to dismantle a history that none of us should be proud of, so that maybe we can offer an inheritance for our future ancestors, for not only a planet that's livable, but a social system and community that's equitable and just. Last Kamadi, thank you so much.
So we have a few minutes, Shaun. I want you to be able to go ahead and have a few moments to have some last words. And there's Shaun's email address.
Absolutely. You know, what I would say is this, is that what she's saying is so powerful, and it's so true. And it's a process for us as people to come together, not as, and again, I've shared this so many times, I'm not interested in being white or black or any other race. I am who I am. I am thankful for who I was created to be. And you should feel the same way. You shouldn't feel guilty about where you came from. You should feel honored that you have the opportunity to step to the plate and be a part of the change that's going to take place. And it's going to happen. It's going to take place. It's a matter of whether you come into unity and fellowship and we come together inside this circle to prosper together, or you choose to stand outside and fight the system. But one way or the other, we've had enough as Black people, Indigenous people, like we're coming together and we're going to bring real change. But we need all of you. We are all one circle together.
Absolutely. And if I might add, at the beginning of this conversation, I asked, what does it mean to read a land acknowledgement? Who is benefiting from such an acknowledgement? How can reading a land acknowledgement lead to Indigenous communities obtaining their stolen land? In my opinion, is to continue these types of conversations.
Yeah.
And in time and then through intentional actions, we can live into these answers. For the future generations, for the next 7 generations. Sean, I want to thank you for joining me today in this conversation. Lori, thank you so much for being an amazing colleague and friend. And Gary, thank you for being able to be a great director. We appreciate you and thank you for your time. Have a good rest of your day.